When you first open Visual Studio, you'll have a dialog box which will list the projects that you've most recently worked on, making them readily available to you, or on the right-hand side to open another project or to create a new project. I'm going to click the Create New Project. It takes me to another dialog box in which I can choose the language that I want to use. We want to choose Visual Basic. The platform, we're going to do Windows, and we're going to create desktop applications. Now, there's various things we can do here with Visual Basic. We're going to be creating Windows Forms app. So I'm going to choose that. Notice that over on the left-hand side, it lists the various project types I've been working on most recently. And you can see Windows Form app is here as well. I can choose it here or I can choose it here. But once I've selected that, I want to click Next. I want to give my app a name. I'm going to call this VB Demo. I can choose where I want to save it. So I have a folder for Visual Basic projects. And there's a checkbox here to place the solution and project in the same directory. I'm going to recommend you check that. This is a fairly new addition. It'll make it a little bit easier for you to zip your projects together to submit them to your instructor. I'm going to click Next. I can choose the framework. When we talk about .NET, having changed from VB6 to VB.NET, .NET is the framework in which Windows runs applications. There are various versions here. The even numbers are the long-term support ones, and then the odd numbers are sort of the in-between ones that have limited support. I'm going to choose the most recent, which is .NET 8, and click Create. Here then is my new project running in Visual Studio. It's a Visual Basic project. I get the form. Every project has a default window called a form, Form 1. And that's what I see here to start with. Because normally, as we saw in the SDLC, in creating our project, we're going to develop the interface first. So that's what comes up. In creating the interface, I have a Properties panel or window down in the bottom right-hand corner in which I can modify the properties of this form or any other object that I add to this form. Just to demonstrate this, I'm going to scroll up a little bit here in the list of properties. And notice there's one here called Back Color. Now I have a little button here that says A to Z with the down arrow. These are alphabetized. I recommend you work in that format. The other format is to categorize these, but you don't know what category each of the different properties or attributes are in. So you want to do alphabetical. So for back color, I can go to Web and choose any of the various named colors. Maybe I want a light sky blue, or I can also go to Custom and choose some standard colors here that I might want to change the color of my background to. I'm going to go back to Web and again just choose a nice, let's do this Alice blue. It's very light blue. The other property I can change here for my form is the text, and that's what's showing up here on the title bar. So I'm going to change this to VB Demo. You notice that when I press the Enter key, that changes up here on the title bar. So we're visually changing our controls, and the form is a control. It's our main window, by modifying properties. So again, in this panel for properties, we have categorized, we have alphabetized. This is just the button that takes us to the properties, one or the other, because there's also a button here that takes us to events. And events are the things that we write code to respond to, like a click of a button or text being changed in a text box. I'm going to go back to my properties. Above the properties window is my Solution Explorer. These are some of the files that are created as part of our project. There's a lot more that are hidden that we don't see, but these are the ones we'll probably want to work with. So here's our Form 1VB. Now if you open this up later, you might find that your form is not visible. And all you have to do then is just basically double click Form 1VB and it'll come back up. This is called our designer. Now I mentioned we can use controls from a toolbox. So if I wanted to add a label, I can create a label on my project. By default, that label has a property called auto size. I like to set mine to false, so it's the size that I drag it to. Notice that I created that label and I dragged it. I can also take any of these controls and simply drag them rather than drawing with them. So again, if I wanted to draw, I select the control, and I create the size that I want. When I get rid of control, I can select it and delete it. Notice this little handle in the upper left-hand corner means it's selected. You see a little dot box around it. I can delete it. So here for the label, I'm going to just type in object-oriented programming practicum. And we see the text appear in the label. I can also adjust the fonts here. So as a font, I can bring up a dialog. Anytime you see a little box, let me come back here. Anytime you see a little box with 3 periods, where you see 3 periods at the end of a menu, that means it's going to bring up a dialog box. That's a standard in software development. Just a little visual clue. So I want to make this bold and make it a little bit larger, and I can change the font if I want. I'm going to go up to Arial, and say OK. So there's my label that I added to it. I can add other things like buttons and so forth. In fact, I'm going to take a button tool, and again, I'm going to drag a button to the size that I want. I'm just going to name it SMCC. And let's change the back color. I'll make it a little bit deeper blue. Now, one of the things is we create our forms, we want to name objects that we're going to use in code. Every object has a name, and by default these are named things like label 1 and button 1. Those aren't very descriptive names, and if we have 20 labels, it gets really confusing. We want to name objects that we're going to use in code to make them a little more meaningful, and we're using something called Hungarian notation. So I'm going to type LBL title. That's going to be the name of my label here. I'm going to name this one BTN SMCC. BTN is our Hungarian notation for a button. The Hungarian notation is not that important, but has been an industry standard from way back when. A lot of people don't use it anymore. I kind of like it. It lets me know that visually in code, oh, this is a button or this is a label. So we designed our interface. Not much to it here. We just did a label and a button, but I want to code it so when I click this button, this says South Mountain Community College. By the way, with the panels here, you can take your panels and move them around. So I can grab the properties panel and drag it over. It's just a little bit easier to get to. And then I can dock it back over here on the left using this docking system. Same with the toolbox. That way you can collapse the toolbox. And this little pin will keep it open. But I can also take the toolbox and move it around. And I can resize any of these panels. And then I can take this panel and maybe want to dock it again back over here on the left-hand side. I can do that. And once again, I can resize it. So you can set up your interface as far as Visual Studio however you like to work best. But this is the default out of the box. Toolbox on the left-hand side, our design area in the middle, Solution Explorer, and Properties on the right-hand side. So I'm going to get to the code window where we're entering the code. And all I'm going to do here is take my button and I'm going to double click on it, which will create an event handler that will respond to a click of my button. That's the default event for a button. So my event handler is named BTN SMCC underscore click. There's some things here in parentheses. We'll ignore those for now, but notice that it handles the click event, the dot click of BTN SMCC. That's the event it's handling. So what do I want to do here? Well, I'm going to say LBL title, and I'm going to change the text property to say South Mountain Community College. I put that in quotes because that's a literal string. It's something the computer's not going to understand. So I say, don't worry about what's between the quotes. Just add that as my text. Change my text of that label to that, where it was object-oriented programming practicum. Now it's going to be LBL title.text. I'm also going to say LBL title.backcolor equals color.white. so I can change the back color property. So any of the properties I can change in code. Now, to go back to my design, there's a tab up here. I can get back to the design, or I can go to the code. On the button bar at the top of Visual Studio, there's a little green triangle, and it says the project here, VB Demo. And I can click on that. That's going to run my application. Now we're going into that test debug mode of our SDLC. So we've created the interface, we coded it, now we're testing and debugging. I want to make sure this works. And if I click the SMCC button here, notice my back color changed to white, and I now get South Mountain Community College as the text. It seemed to work. In the editor, if I just change this to back color equals white, notice I get a little red squiggly here. That red squiggly means the compiler does not understand the code that I've written. There's an error here. There's a bug that I need to fix. And so look for those as you're writing your code. Sometimes you'll get green ones, which basically is just a warning that something doesn't seem to be right or something you create is not being used. Those aren't going to kill your program. The red squigglies will kill your program. So if I try to run this right now, I get an error saying white is not declared. It may be inaccessible due to its protection level. That doesn't mean a whole lot to me at this point, but it tells me where the problem is. And I can look at my code and go, oh yeah, I need to tell it that white is a color, and I use that dot notation of color.white. And now that red squiggly goes away, and I can run my application. So that's a real brief look at Visual Studio. Just want to show you how things are laid out here and how you can manipulate things, and our process in terms of the SDLC within Visual Studio of creating our interface, coding it, testing and debugging. And by the way, I created my application in my projects folder, named it VB Demo. I can find that in Windows Explorer. I'm just going to open that up. There's a whole lot of stuff that's created for us. So our solution file, .sln file, is how we can always get back to this project. We can find that and double click on that, and that'll launch our project into Visual Studio where we can continue to work on it. There's several folders. I'm going to go into the bin folder. In that is a debug folder. In that is my .NET 8 Windows folder. I'm going to double click on that. And inside of that, when we clicked that little green triangle to test our project, it created an executable file for us. So here's vbdemo.exe. Now again, that's located in the project folder, bin, debug, .NET 8 Windows in this case. And this is the file we can use to deploy. Now I can actually put this on a flash drive and go to another computer, and I can double click on it and actually run the application. So that's what happens when we compile our code. Compiling a project takes all of our source files, actually all of this here, and ends up creating from all of that this executable. There are other ways for deployment that we can create installers, which is the better way to do it. But for now, this is an easy way to test your projects on another computer if you wanted, just by double clicking the exe file. You might get a warning that this application is not deemed safe or secure, and there are options to override that and still be able to run it. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.